I'm going to be showing you some amazing new custom brushes that were created exclusively for Adobe Photoshop CS. And as luck would have it, they are included on the CD that you find this demo on. Now, what these brushes are good for is for creating the illusion of hair on a human head or fur on an animal's body, that type of thing. These are some pretty cool brushes. I'm going to show you just a couple of ways that you can use these, and then you can explore on your own and find more robust uses later. So just some basic uses for these brushes. Let's go ahead and load them in first. Now I have the brush targeted in my tools palette. I'm going to go up to the contextual menu up at the top of the screen and pull down my brushes. Now what I need to do is I need to go and load the brushes. So if I click on this triangle here and pull down to load brushes, that should take me to my brush library located inside of the applications folder where Adobe Photoshop CS resides. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select hairbrushes.abr and hit load. You'll find now that these are appended at the bottom of your list of brushes here. Now, I currently have these listed in a large list which includes the thumbnail along with the name of the brush. That just helps me figure out which brush I'm using rather than just guessing based on a small icon. Especially if the icon is very fine, you can't necessarily tell what it is, so I tend to keep it listed along with the name. Now, all of these names are names that I have made up off the top of my head. They make sense to me. If they don't make sense to you, you can rename them. You simply click on the contextual menu and you can pull down to rename brush on any brush that you have selected. So you can call it whatever you like. Okay, so first things first, we need to create a new layer because I don't want to actually destroy any of the original image here. So I'm going to create a new blank layer in my layers palette over here, and I'm going to double click on its name and rename it as hair 1. Now, when I paint these hairs, they tend to have a sort of random spray to them. So I want to try and establish a hairline, sort of a boundary, so that the hair doesn't spray down into the forehead area or over the ears. I want to give the illusion that it's actually going behind the ears. So I'm going to create a boundary. Now I could just use the lasso tool or the magic wand and select the background, but I want to create a very specific path. So I'm actually going to go over to my Paths dialog, target that, and I'm going to create a new path. Now if I select the pen tool, which is the letter P on your keyboard, you can click and use Bezier curves to establish your hairline. And I'm just very quickly going in and doing this. You can of course spend more time and get a much more accurate path. Just real quickly, so it'll go behind the shoulders, behind the collar, and behind the ears, and behind the jaw. Okay, so now we have our hairline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this an active selection. I can click on this button here, and it makes it the marching ants, so that we know that this is a selection. Now currently this is the inverse of what we want. The selection is selecting the face and ears on the inside. We actually want the inverse of that. We want it to select the area outside. So I need to invert the mask. So if I go up to select and pull down to inverse, it now is selecting the area outside the boundaries of the hairline. Now the other thing that I want to do is I want to feather this selection so it's not a hard transition to forehead at the edge of the hair. So I'm going to go select feather, and let's feather it about 15 pixels. Okay. Now the other thing is I don't necessarily need to see this selection while we're working, so I'm going to hide that. So if you go under View and pull down to Extras, it will actually hide the selection. Okay. So now, I'm going to go back to my layers palette. I have my hair 1 layer targeted. I have my paintbrush selected. Let's go select, let's try our curly afro hair. Let's see what that looks like. Now I'm using a pressure sensitive Wacom tablet, and I highly recommend you do the same. It doesn't have to be that brand, but a mouse has no pressure sensitivity. And all of these brushes are built with pressure sensitivity in mind. The harder you press, the denser and darker the hair gets, because it's actually layering hair upon hair upon hair. And you start getting a built-up dense sort of look the more you go over the same area. So I'm pushing a little bit harder and I'm getting darker hairs, a little bit denser. And as you can see with this brush, it's laying in the hairs fairly quickly. Within a matter of moments I have a good base coat to our hair. Now, generally what I'll do is I'll work in layers so that I can make adjustments to the layers of hair after the fact. So if I want to do several layers of hair and then blur them in sequence so the backmost layer is a little bit more out of focus, the next layer is a little less out of focus, etc., etc., you can give this the feeling of depth. And you can also do lighting tricks after the fact on the individual layers to equal the lighting that's present in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and create a second layer of hair and label that as hair 2. And I'm going to start with my base color a little bit lighter and start layering in some more hair. And the more layers you do, the denser it's going to get, thicker and fuller, and it'll start looking a little bit more realistic. So very quickly, we're starting to see the build-up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Use my magnifying tool, or I can hit on the Macintosh Command plus or on the PC Control plus. And if I hold down the space bar, it becomes the hand tool, and I can center my image. Clicking back on the letter B for brush, I go back to my brush tool and I can continue painting. Now, as you can see, I can't paint on the forehead area because we've established the barrier of our hairline. So we're getting a nice cutoff area where the hair stops painting. So let's go ahead and create another layer of hair. Wait for my machine to catch back up. Okay. Let's create another layer of hair. Hair 3. Now also what we can do is we can increase the opacity of our brush as well as the flow so that it's actually putting more pigment on when we brush. Let's brighten the hair a little bit more as our base color. There we go. Now we're starting to actually see some detail to our lighter hairs. And I'm just very lightly pressing with the tablet to get some fine hairs up in the front. So as you can see, very quickly we've built up the hair and it looks fairly realistic. Now I could sit here for hours and hours and detail this in, but that's just the basics of how I would actually utilize these hairbrushes. Now there's all sorts of different types of hair in here. There's frizzy hair and straight hair and curly hair. There's buzz cuts. We have the 80s band hair. If I turn these layers off here and make a new layer, the 80s band hair is lots of fun. It's a little difficult to manage sometimes because it seems to have a mind of its own as far as which direction it wants to flow. But it's semi-directional based on the direction of which way you stroke the brush with the tablet. So you can sort of get it to move in the general direction that you're aiming. And in a later demo, I'll go in and use Liquify, and we'll try and tame this wild hair. But this gives you the general idea of one way that you can utilize these brushes. There's lots and lots of different ways that you can combine these brushes together to get interesting looks and techniques, and I'll go into that in some later demos.